The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
My name is Jasmine, and I am a recovering drug addict.
My name is Richie Farrell, aka the Old White Junkie.
And we are your hosts for Exit Team Nashua.
Our mission is to bring recovery into the living room.
Last year, over 72,000 Americans died of an accidental overdose.
That's almost 200 Americans every single day.
We will bring you guests with real-life experiences with addiction and recovery. Welcome to Exit Team Nashua.
Welcome everyone to Exit Team Nashua. My name's Jessie and I will be your host this evening. Tonight in the studio, I've invited Morgan to share her story. Thank you, Morgan, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Morgan and I know each other for quite a few years now. It's been.
Yeah.
We met, Sober Living?
2016.
2016. Wow, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
We've seen each other through quite a bit. And it's great to be sitting here with you today, both of us in active recovery and, have completely different lives than we did back then.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a journey.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. So, let's jump right into it. Why don't you tell us about yourself? Obviously, I know you, but I've never actually heard the full thing. So let's jump into Morgan and who you are.
So I grew up in a pretty alcoholic environment. My father is functioning. My mother was not. Between my mom not being a functioning alcoholic and my dad being a functioning alcoholic, between the two of them, my childhood was not normal. Mm-hmm. I couldn't go out to sporting events or do things after school with other kids unless another parent drove me because my parents wanted to go home and drink.
Yeah.
A lot of my childhood looked like my mom leaving me alone so that she could drink with her friends, mm-hmm. Which resulted in me being left alone in dangerous situations. And that pretty much carried with me all the way through high school until I got into a lot of trouble with the law and was kind of forced to move back in with my dad.
Okay. So your parents were separated?
Yeah. So my parents separated over money and alcoholism probably around 14.
When you were 14?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a tough age to have your parents separate on top of all of everything else that was going on.
You would think so, but I was excited. I was I get 2 Christmases, I get 4 parents, I get 2 homes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I saw all the ways I could manipulate the situation.
Okay. And so you had been living with your mom after the split?
Yeah, so when my parents split, I had a lot of resentment with my dad because I thought my mom was the fun parent. Mm-hmm. So I went with my mom, and in that decision, my mom basically became my best friend because she didn't really know how to deal with the divorce. So we basically just became drinking buddies. Mm-hmm. I had my first sip of alcohol probably at 13 or 14, along with my first time smoking cigarettes and hanging out with the cool crowd. Mm. And it just was the first time that I felt I could be comfortable in my skin because my whole life up until that point, I didn't know how to really talk to people. I always felt I was the outcast. I never felt I was in the right place no matter what I was doing. Mm. So that first drink and hanging out with my mom's friends, I was okay, this is my comfort level.
Mm. And you said you were around 14, and was the first drink with your mom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the first 3 years of my alcoholism was just me and my mom, mm-hmm. And her friends. Mm-hmm. And then when I got in trouble, I got busted for B&E and Grand Theft Auto at 14 years old.
Wow.
15. And I basically was forced to move back in with my father and join a military program for high school students.
Wow. That's pretty young to breaking and entering in Grand Theft Auto when you were 15, did you say?
Yeah. So it wasn't we set out to be minions, you know what I mean? It was just like this little window in like a small town that like we kicked in to go in the basement and see like what was in there.
Yeah.
It wasn't like this big planned out thing, but the person that I was with had also stolen the vehicle, and then I was the only one like left on the property when the cops showed up.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been pretty scary.
Yeah, I pretty much was pretty rebellious at the time, so I was like, yeah, just send me to placement. I was like, I don't want to join the military.
Right. Okay. So, but that's not what happened.
No. So they put me in that program. For the first year, I like rebelled it, dyed my hair all the colors you're not supposed to, never wore the uniform, continued to drink. And then like, I don't know, something like shifted in me at the end of that year, like seeing all the people that like I was a freshman with, like go up and get these awards. And I was like, well, like, what about me? You know what I mean? Like, I want those awards. So I somehow managed to like stop drinking at the end of my freshman year. And I did pretty well up until my senior year. I had scholarships and I was going to go military. Like I had completely changed my tune. And I started getting calls about my mom. She, as you know, my mom was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease when I was about 17 years old. And there was like a lot of confusion around that. So it took like a long time to figure out what was wrong. And like that pretty much like kicked off my addiction because I immediately like got back into drinking. I backed out of like all my college plans. I had been in like this long-term relationship in high school, jumped out of that. And I started going to like parties and getting involved in like the wrong crowds. I was introduced to cocaine for the first time. It just like, as my mom got sicker, like my alcoholism progressed.
So was it like, out of the fear that like you knew you were going to lose your mom? Like,
I don't really know. I know a lot of it was like I wanted to fit in. A lot of it was validation and like feeling like if I did these things, like I would fit in with the people that I was hanging around. And I'm sure like a lot of it was avoidance, you know? Like even though at the time I thought like, and it sucks to say out loud, but at the time I was like, oh, I'm the girl with the sick mom. Like I used it for attention.
yeah.
But at the same time, I think I was in like a lot of pain and I just didn't know how to like look at that.
Right. You even know how to like process it or realize that that's the feelings that you were having.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So, senior year, you kind of blew everything up.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I backed out of everything and started getting like into the in crowd as what I thought it was.
Yeah.
My first time using cocaine was a weird experience. It was like everything in my childhood and my life had always told me that substances were wrong. And then like I saw someone that I had grown up with that like used to babysit me, that like was a great student, like had all the things that I thought I wanted to be. And then like he showed up at the party and he used cocaine. So like in my mind, I was like, oh, well, if he can do it, like I can do it.
Right.
So I tried it and I hated everything about it. I hated that it was an upper, that it gave me anxiety, that it burned, like everything about it I despised, but it was the first thing I would think about when I woke up in the morning, and that never like triggered any red flags for me. I just thought that was normal. And that like carried with me until I eventually ended up getting into like a really toxic breakup. I lost power of attorney to my mom, all of these things. So eventually I ended up turning to Percocet.
So how old were you when that happened?
I want to say 19. From 17 to 19, I just went from like party to party and relationship to relationship. And eventually ended up like me and my mom moved in with the boyfriend that I was with at the time, who I ended up getting engaged to, who also sold drugs. And like, that's where I thought like I wanted to be. You know, I thought that being with him and like having everything that I needed at my disposal was all I ever needed in life. So eventually I kept declining and like moving away from my mom and not taking care of her the way that I was supposed to, which led me right into like the people that were using things like Percocet and Vicodin.
So had you graduated? Did you graduate, or you were able to graduate?
Yeah, I did graduate.
Yeah. Okay. And then, you know, tell us a little bit about like, you know, the progression of your illness along with your mom's illness. That must have been really a lot to handle for a young girl.
It really was pretty lateral. So like at the same time that my mom was just getting sicker, like realistically, I was getting sicker. My mom eventually, so Lou Gehrig's disease breaks down like every muscle in your body until you're basically paralyzed. So eventually, like she couldn't talk, she couldn't move her hands correctly, she couldn't drive anymore, she had to stop working. I became my mom's full-time caretaker.
Is that something that happens in relation to, alcoholism?
I don't think so.
Okay.
There's not a lot of knowledge about Lou Gehrig's disease up until this point. But they do believe it can either be hereditary, in which case it skips generations, or it can be sporadic, where there's no like real known cause to where it comes from.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So you were telling us a little bit how she was getting worse and losing kind of like all function.
That's okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So eventually I became my mom's full-time caretaker, like bathing her, feeding her, carrying her, changing her.
Wow.
And even in that time, like I was still somewhat able to show up for her, but for the most part, like drugs had consumed my entire life.
Yeah.
I couldn't even go like an 8-hour workday without like leaving at lunch to go and get what I needed to like heal my needs and then go back to work.
Right. So were you getting any kind of support? Like, was there any like visiting nurses? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like a lot for just you to manage.
So at the time, my father really wanted to help me, but I don't think he really knew how. And especially like he was in a new relationship and it was his ex-girlfriend, or ex-wife. So there was like a lot of tension as far as like him providing help to me. There was a woman that was, she was actually our neighbor growing up. She was a lawyer. So she did a lot as far as like supporting me and helping me with the legal matters. But as far as like taking care of her, it was really just me and the toxic fiance at that point.
Did you? I missed this. Were you an only child? Did you have any siblings?
I was an only child. Yeah.
You're an only child. Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. I'm really sorry, Morgan.
Thank you.
So what? So then, what happened after you got it? You were addicted to Percocets, and your mom was rapidly declining.
Yeah. So September 2015, my mom had basically been taken from me because I could not take care of her the way that I was supposed to. I was viciously using Percocets and anything else that I could get my hands on at that point besides heroin. And in September 2015, like I got the call that my mom was in the hospital. So like I went and stayed, and like the nurses woke me up at 6 a.m. and said like, you need to call everyone, your mom's gonna die today. So like I made that phone call, and like my family is very spiritual, on my mom's side, very Wiccan. So like everybody came to say their goodbyes, and like when my mom took her last breath, instead of staying and being a part of that process, like I immediately turned to drugs. And the only thing that I could find that day was heroin. So I ended up using heroin for the first time.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So then where did you, that was 2015, you lost your mom and you turned to heroin.
I spent the next 6 months to a year just like off the grid. Once I got into heroin, it was like homelessness, car crashes, toxic relationships. I had like zero contact with family. I really hit like this low in my life that I had always judged like everybody else for. And that carried with me until like the day of my 21st birthday. I had just recently totaled a car that wasn't mine. I'd broken my back in 4 places. I was paralyzed at Elliott Hospital in Manchester. And like I stayed at that hospital for probably about a month, like working through that and like relearning how to walk. I went through physical therapy. And at 21 years old, like I woke up with like no alcohol, no drugs. I was dope sick. I had no friends, no car. I was basically, I was homeless.
Wow.
And I don't know, like something clicked in me that was like, this is not how you spend your 21st birthday.
Wow. You're on your 21st birthday. Wow.
Yeah, literally day of.
That is crazy. You broke your back?
Yeah, so that was right before my 21st birthday. I had rolled that car down here because I grew up in Littleton, New Hampshire. So I was down here and I had rolled that car and I broke my back and I ended up at Elliott.
Wow. That's crazy. I did not know that. I had similar, I didn't break my back, but I ended up in Elliott Hospital on one of those mornings that dope sick and just desperate, no one to call and not a friend in the world.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so you had the moment and you're like, this isn't how I want to live. And then what happened?
Well, I would love to say like that was it for me, but it wasn't. You
Mhm.
know, that did start like my journey in like my first experience with recovery. So I went from there to like a hospital, to a detox, to a rehab, to a sober living, which is where I met you. And like for the next 2 years, like sober living for me was like, I was only there because I had really nowhere else to go. I wasn't listening to any of the suggestions. The biggest thing I was always told was listen to women, and I wanted nothing to do with that suggestion. I'd go to like 12-step meetings because I was told to, but I never really like took in any information.
Mm-hmm.
I basically was just like, I was completely running on like self-will and like seeking out validation, and like my character defects were flaring, and it just led to like this point where in 2018 like I finally took both feet out of like my program and out of sober living, and I was like, nope, I'm going back to the streets.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you made a conscious decision to just say, I'm leaving and this is done.
Yeah, because I'd spent 2 years like trying to go to 12-step programs.
Mhm.
Well, what I thought was trying.
Right.
But like I convinced myself that it was never going to work for me, because like at this point I continuously kept relapsing. Like the toxic relationships were huge for me because I never listened to like the suggestion of like working on myself. I watched a boyfriend die in the program.
So sorry.
I put myself through like a lot of torture because I wasn't willing to really do the things that sober living was telling me to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Running our own show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I kind of remember that time. I remember seeing you at a meeting and you were kind of just like trying to figure out what to do. So after that realization, how long did you decided that you were going to kind of just give up? How long did you go out for?
When I finally took 2 feet out, I was out for probably about 10 months, which doesn't sound like a lot when you say it out loud. But at this point, I was living in Manchester, which is a vastly different environment than where I grew up. So like the drugs were worse, the people were worse, the environment was worse. Like everything about my relapse was just terrible. I ended up, again, homeless. I was in and out of Valley Street Jail. I was in this relationship where basically I was only there to get what I needed. I continuously would like give my car away and end up sleeping on sidewalks because I would use my car as leverage to get what I needed to feel better. I went the lowest I'd ever been. Like I manipulated my father and like his girlfriend, who's now basically my stepmom. Like I would manipulate them into giving me money, food, fixing my car to prolong like my drug use that essentially was leaving me homeless and broken.
So then, what was the turning point for you in that?
I think like a combination of things. That 2 years that I had, like I had heard many suggestions and learned like a ton of things. And then at the end of that 10 months, like I was getting out of Valley Street for the last time. It was around Valentine's Day. I had just been begging like my higher power to just get me out of that situation. And like I remember walking out of Valley Street like in flip-flops in the dead of winter and just like walking all the way across town to get what I needed, completely breaking my promise to like my higher power. And then like I got this call from someone that had worked in a treatment center and was like, hey, do you want to work here? And I was like, I've been using. And they were like, okay, do you want a scholarship? And they put me like back in treatment. And again, like I would love to say that was it for me, but it probably took me another 6 months or so before I at this point had tried to kill myself with substances probably 3 times on top of 2 suicide attempts in Valley Street. And I just had gotten to this point where I was like, I'm never going to get sober. Like this is never going to work for me. And after that last that last attempt to take my own life, it was an overdose. And I woke up outside a sober house, no idea how I got there. My friends had Narcaned me. And the police were there and they knew who I was. And I was so scared that they were going to arrest me. And they were like, listen, like, we'll let you go in your own car. You just need to go to a hospital. And I got there and like I could feel my body like dying because the way that Narcan works, as I'm sure you know, right, is like once the Narcan wears off, all those substances go right back to your receptors and you die again.
Right.
And I could literally feel that happening to me. And for the first time I was scared. I was like, oh my God, like this is it. This is where I die. And like a woman from a 12-step program who by all rights should have hated me at this point for all the stupid things I had done in the last 3 years. Like she came and she sat with me all night. And she got me into another program and I went to Green Mountain Treatment Center and I was introduced to 12-step programs in the real and right way. And I finally went through like steps 1 through 9 and I had a spiritual experience, but not like the spiritual experience that I needed. I gained a lot of knowledge about like myself and my alcoholism and like what that does to me. So when I got to sober living and I went out and I used for the last time, like I went out with this expectation that like that one hit of whatever I was buying was going to take away all that pain and all those thoughts. And like the last time that I got high was that July 14th, 2019. And I left the sober house full of women that loved me. And I went out with this expectation that the drug was going to fix me. And I remember like taking that hit and still feeling all that stupid pain. And I was like, why isn't this working?
Right.
And I just had like this complete moment of powerlessness where I was like, I had always like kept this reservation that like I could control it somehow or I could pick it up and put it down without a problem or I'd get sober when I wanted to.
Right.
And I finally had this moment of like, I can't control this.
Right.
And like I started calling and asking for help and I had been to so many treatment centers in the last 6 months that nobody would pick up the phone calls. So I sat in a trap house and I cried all night.
Wow. So then what happened?
I called a woman in the program. Well, I actually called a guy in the program who put a woman in the program on the phone. And she said that I could sleep at her house. She told me I could sleep there for 1 week if I walked her dog. You were there. I started going to those meetings with you, actually, in Exeter. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I started sleeping on her couch.
Okay. Yep.
And she took me through the 12 steps and like she would bring me out to meetings. She would bring me to fellowship. I basically, like, her and her best friend babysat me for the first month because I was supposed to be there for a week and I ended up staying 30 days.
Yeah.
And then, like, eventually I went from there to sober living. And, like, in that sober living program, like, I finished step 4 and, like, read a 5th step. And, like, things started to change for me. Like, I finally had gotten to this point where I was willing to accept things as they happened, where I took, like, some of the suggestions that I ignored for years, like calling women and relying on a higher power and, like, just letting things happen the way that they were supposed to happen and not, like, inserting my self-will into every situation.
Yep.
And, like, good things started to happen in my life. You know, I moved out of sober living probably around 6 months. I got into an apartment who, like, then my roommates started using. The last 2 years of my sobriety have been by no means, like, perfect.
Yeah.
But every situation that's happened, like, I've had a way to deal with it that didn't involve getting high or drinking.
Right. Right. And you most likely learned that from the programs that you've been to, the 12-step program.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, they say that, like, to stay sober that you have to have that spiritual experience and that it can either be instant or, like, it's gradual. And mine was 100% gradual. Over, like, from 2016 until now, I've had several experiences with, like, women in this program and programs, like rehabs, different sober livings where I've either heard or seen or felt things happen that eventually showed me how to get sober.
Yeah. So, and I think you just kind of summed it up, but like the biggest turning point for you, would you say that took place like in sober living and learning from the other women in the programs that you went to?
Definitely sober living over time. But the biggest thing for me was finally actually putting the action behind it. Like the biggest difference that I made in my sobriety this time was I would call women every single day. The women that I had been afraid of, the women that I hated, the women that I thought were better than me or weaker than me. I called everyone. If I had a day where I was just anxious, or I thought I was going to use, or I thought that maybe I'm supposed to use, like, I called women. And they've been, every situation that's happened in my sobriety this time, like, they have been the turning point for me.
Awesome. So, you know, today I know that you're working in treatment. You know, you want to tell us a little bit about, like, you know, just what it's like in your life today.
Yeah. So in my life today, like, I have an apartment that's just me, no using roommates, which is cool because it's weird to be able to, like, sit with myself and have peace, and not feel like I need to be go, go, go every second of the day.
Yeah.
I have friendships that I truly value, and, like, I can call those women or men any time of day, and, like, they'll help me. My father and his girlfriend, who, like, I manipulated for years and years and years, like, invite me to holidays. They call me, we text, we have, like, a real relationship. I do work in treatment today, which is beautiful. It's a treatment center that, like, helped contribute to, like, saving my life. And today I get to give that back to people, even when they may not want it or know how to hear it.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's quite a journey, and it's so amazing to see you come out, like, just with dignity and grace, and just be a success story, you know, and an empowering example to other women in this program.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for being so open with us and sharing. Is there anything else that you want to add before we go?
I guess I would just say to, like, the people trying to do this that even though there's a lot of, like, rough points in my story, like, those are not the things that make me an alcoholic. You know, what makes us an alcoholic is that piece of us that, like, something's always missing, and we're not going to get outside. We're not going to fix that by, like, seeking outside circumstances or things.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. And if people want to get in touch with you, how would they reach you?
So they can definitely find me on Facebook.
Okay.
Morgan Taylor.
Okay.
And I'll answer anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching tonight, and we will see you next time. Have a great evening.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.